It's a little bit different for a sermon video that we normally show. On Sunday, we had a little bit of technical difficulty, and the sermon was not actually live streamed or recorded. So we wanted to take some time today to draw you back into the sermon. So if you're watching this a year from now and you're wondering why this video is different, that's why. So today, we're just going to jump in as if we were talking yesterday about the sermon series that we're in. We're in a sermon series that we're simply calling Kingdom Stories. And what we've been doing throughout the summer so far is we are looking at the parables of Jesus, and we're trying to figure out what is there that we can wrestle with that will help us grow spiritually. See, parables are stories, short stories that Jesus told and many other people told throughout history that are simply stories that help us consider what's happening inside of our own lives. And in fact, parables that Jesus told reveal the kingdom and character of God. That as we look at parables together, we begin to understand who God is and what he's about, but we also understand what it means that we're part of the kingdom. Did you know that the minute that you say yes to Jesus and you're saved, as we call it, you're part of a new citizenship. You're no longer simply a citizen of this earth. You're a citizen of heaven. You're part of a new kingdom. And parables that Jesus taught teach us, even though we're still in this flesh, what it means to be citizens of heaven while we wait for the day that we get our heavenly bodies and we are with him for eternity. So not only do parables give us that information about the kingdom and character of God, parables are also an invitation for us to meditate on the things of God and the words of Jesus and to let them form us as we think about new concepts. I mean, let's be honest. You don't remember the sermons I preach. You don't, because it's impossible to remember all the things that I say. But if I tell a really good story, you think about it longer. Because stories have a way of sticking to us, and they have a way of helping us remember things for a longer period of time. And so when Jesus told parables, people walked away meditating on who is Jesus and what does he mean for my life, and meditating on what that means for them as they think about these new concepts of being part of the kingdom of God. The way we would say it here is that parables teach us to stay curious. That parables cause us to not just listen to the word and move on, but it causes us to wrestle. So today we're going to be in a place in Scripture that has a really interesting parable that I think can help us understand more about what it means not only to be a part of the kingdom, but what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. So if you're ready, say I'm ready. All right, let's do it. Okay, Luke chapter 14, starting at verse 25. It says this: large crowds were traveling with Jesus. Now, before we even take another step further, I don't know about you, but my story is that I grew up a kid in church. And in fact, some of my earliest memories, maybe even the earliest memory I have, is inside the church walls. It was just a part of my life. And I grew up in kids ministry, and I went to youth group, and I asked my wife to marry me inside of the church. I mean, the church was a big part of my life. And when I think about large crowds traveling with Jesus, I can see myself, and I hope you can see yourself as part of the large crowd traveling with him. And in that large crowd, I'm sure there were disciples who were letting the message of Jesus change their life. But there were also people in the crowd who maybe believed Jesus was the Messiah, but they were just there to watch. And there were probably also other people in the crowd who were there who were really more skeptical than they were interested. And they're trying to figure out what's this guy about? And maybe we can trip him up and prove that he's not who he says he was. As I think about my journey with Jesus and I see myself in the large crowd, I've been in different spots in my own life. There are seasons of my life where I've always believed in Jesus. I've always believed, I was taught to believe that. I've always believed that Jesus was God's son, that he died on the cross for our sins, that he rose from the grave. I haven't really doubted that much in my life. But there are seasons of my life, especially as I moved into my teenage years, where I wasn't sure that I wanted to follow him. See, at the age of 13, I accepted Jesus as my Savior at a summer camp. And by the time I'm 15, I don't want him to change me at all. I mean, I was actually in a spot where the idea of Jesus having any control of my life was really making me uncomfortable. And so I kind of vacillated back and forth between wanting to be this guy who's following Jesus, but also wanting to do things my way. I can't be the only one who can relate to that. And so there are times where I'm in the crowd and I'm kind of just watching from the back. There are times where I'm up close and I'm watching what's happening. And there's times in my life where I've said, I want to follow Jesus and I'm going to let him lead my life. So I've been in different spots in the crowd. And here's what I found. what I found was you can be right up hearing the stories and seeing how God is moving and seeing how Jesus can change lives. But while you're up that close and personal to what's happening, you can also still not be following him as a disciple. The way I would put it is this: you can be in proximity to Jesus without him being your priority. So you can be close to him in proximity, but that doesn't make him your priority. So let's look at Luke 14, 25 and 26. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and his mother, his wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple." Could you imagine hearing that? I mean, these are Jews in the countryside. And here we have Jesus saying, if you don't hate your mom and dad, your wife, your kids, and even yourself, you can't be my disciple. Now that seems to go right into the face of what the 10 Commandments say. In fact, one of those commandments says, honor thy father and mother. And here Jesus is saying you have to hate them. And if you want to grab that scripture and pull it out of context, you can use that to think some ugly things about Jesus. But here's what I know to be true. As we journey through this text together, by the time we get to the end of it, I think you're going to understand the heart of what Jesus is trying to say. But what he says is, if you don't do this, you cannot be my disciple. Being a disciple is not a Jesus concept. It's a Jewish concept. In fact, Jews throughout history have followed teachers that they call rabbis. And as they follow them, they become a disciple of that rabbi. And in becoming a disciple of that rabbi, what that means is that they are going to not only listen to their teaching, they're going to try to look just like them. Not necessarily in their physical features, but look like them in the way they act and live. And what Jesus is saying is, if you're going to be like me, if you're going to listen to my teaching, this is a little harder than you think it is, large crowd. Okay? This is a little harder than you think it is. You can't just be in proximity to me and not let me be your priority. And then he goes on to say something else crazy. He says, and whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. They don't even know that Jesus is going to the cross yet. They don't know that that's part of the story. But what he's saying to them is, even if you experience persecution, even if what comes from following me is pain or death, you cannot be my disciple if you can't carry your cross and continue to follow after me. See, the thing that's important to hear this morning is that there is a cost to discipleship. Following Jesus is not just a free thing that feels good. There is a cost to being a disciple of Jesus. You can be near Jesus and there's no cost. But if you want to be a disciple who's looking more like him and listening to his teaching and letting it change your life, there is a cost to that. Jesus goes on to say this in verse 28. He says, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. You ever woken up and thought to yourself, I think I want to build a tower today? I haven't either. But suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, this person began to build and wasn't able to finish. Could you imagine? I'm going to build a tower today. And you start to build, you get about 3 feet off the ground, and you realize I'm out of funds and I'm out of supplies. And then somebody walks up a couple days later and says, what's this weird 3-foot thing on the ground? That's my tower. Imagine how embarrassing that would be to think you're going to build something and not be able to finish it because you didn't count the cost. You didn't estimate what it would cost to build it. This not only happened in ancient times, it happens now. In fact, one of the prime examples of not counting the cost is the Cincinnati subway. Did you know that there's a subway in Cincinnati? Did you know that there's an underground tunnels in Cincinnati? Here's the thing. The reason you don't know about it is because it was never finished. That they started to build it and they didn't count the cost. And now there's 2 miles of underground tunnels in Cincinnati that lead to nowhere. And there's no subway terminals, there's no trains down there. I mean, there's nothing down there because they didn't count the cost. This also happened to me when I was a freshman in high school. I took my wife or my girlfriend at the time, on a date. And we went to this really expensive, well, for a freshman, an expensive restaurant in Columbus called Engine House No. 5. And we get to this restaurant, and I've got $80 in my pocket. And I think that's plenty. Well, then we get to the menu, and this is before you could Google how much things cost before you get there. We look at the menu, and I realize, this is going to be expensive. Now, my wife being generous and gracious, and me not wanting to tell her that it was too expensive, she decided not to order the most expensive thing on the menu, but she likes to try new foods. And so she chose swordfish. Swordfish is as expensive as it sounds. I think her meal was like $35, $40, and I've got 80. And I'm starting to think, how am I going to make this work? Because I got to leave a tip. I don't want to be embarrassed. And all that stress made it really hard for me to get through this date with my girlfriend, because I knew that at the end the bill was coming, and I had not counted the cost well. Well, in case you were concerned, she ended up marrying me anyway, and I was able to pay the bill, but I'm certain that the waiter got a pretty terrible tip. But we did get there, but I didn't count the cost. I didn't know how much it would cost, and it creates stress and anxiety as I thought about, what have I gotten myself into? The story goes like this. Jesus continues. He says, or suppose a king who's about to go to war against another king. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose one coming against him with 20,000? See, if you're going to take 10,000 men into war against another group of people that has twice as many men, you better stop and consider whether or not your men can handle it. I mean, the king wants to win the war, but he doesn't want to lose all of his men. He sits down and considers whether he's able to follow through. And he goes on to say this, if he is not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off, and will ask for terms of peace. He'll send his troops ahead, a few of them, to negotiate a peaceful terms with the other party so that nobody's soldiers have to get killed in order to keep his people safe, even if it means he loses the war. He's counted the cost of what his men and what his country mean to him. It says, in the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples. Give up everything. Give up your hopes and dreams, your plans, your resources, what you think your life should look like. When you say yes to Jesus, you're choosing to give all of that up. All of that up. And you're saying, Lord, when you lead my life, it's better than when I lead it. And then Jesus shares one more thing that seems sideways, but I think it's actually worth talking about. He says this, salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is fit neither for the soil nor for the manure pile. It is thrown out. Whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. See, I don't know about you, but I don't know about the expiration of salt, so I had to look it up. And when I looked up the expiration of salt, salt does not expire. It's a mineral. But here's what causes it to lose its saltiness. It loses its saltiness in one of two ways. Either it's contaminated, meaning something else is added to it, or it's diluted, meaning it's watered down. And I think the point Jesus is trying to make here is, man, I've told you that following me means you got to hate your mom and dad. You got to hate your wife and your kids. You got to even hate yourself. You've got to pick up your cross and you got to follow me. And then you've got to give up everything. Don't you dare try to add things to this other than what I've said. And don't you dare try to water this down to make this easier, because following Jesus has a cost that cannot be watered down or added to. It just is the cost of what it means to follow Jesus. Well, why didn't he make that easier for us? Like, why can't following Jesus be something where it just is easy to say yes to and we all live happily ever after? Well, we know the answer. We know the answer because of the relationships we have on this earth. See, no matter what your relationship looks like, whether it's with God himself or if it's with a spouse or family or friends, every relationship requires sacrifice. Relationships require sacrifice. We have to be willing to give something up of ourselves to say yes to being in a relationship with someone else. And why would it be any different with God himself? If he created us that way, relationships require sacrifice. So, now that we've covered all that, what is the cost of discipleship? What am I actually saying yes to giving up if I choose to not just be someone in proximity, but I want to make Jesus my priority? Well, I think the text has already told us, so let me remind you. The first, number one, all other relationships don't even compare to our devotion to Jesus. See, we think it's like God, then family, then maybe ourselves or our neighbors, maybe our work, and we make a list like this. And in that list, God's first and everything else comes after. But what Jesus is actually saying is that's not actually how it works. It's God family. And that gap between how much God is our priority and how much our family comes after that, or even ourselves, that gap looks a lot like hate. Because he is so powerful and so important to us and such a priority that everything else in comparison looks like dust. And so when he says you must hate your father and mother, hate your wife, your kids, and even yourself, what he's saying is in comparison to your priority with me and your love for me, all the rest of that should almost look like the opposite. Because it's coming so far down the list from how you see me. Put me first. Let me be your priority and give me all of your devotion. Number 2, we willingly live a life that may result in persecution. If you want to, what's the cost of discipleship? You want to understand that? The cost of discipleship is no matter what this world or our country or anything else looks like, we're willing to count the cost and be persecuted for the sake of following Jesus, because he is number 1. Number 3, not only do we face persecution, but the second part of that is this. In the face of hardship, we continue to follow his leading. We take up our cross, face the persecution, and follow him. The other piece of that no matter what comes, no matter how difficult it gets, our answer to following him is already yes. And lastly, we give up everything. There is nothing of this earth that is more valuable or important than following Jesus. The way I would say it is the deepest desire is to be an everyday disciple of Jesus, not just simply be in his presence. We don't want to just simply feel good by watching how Jesus is moving. We want to step in and say, I'm not here to feel good. I'm here to follow. I'm here to chase after you, Lord. I'm here to do what it is you've called me to do so that I can look more like you. That's what it means to count the cost of discipleship and to move forward. So we do car conversations every week. We have 3 questions in our car conversation this week that you could be asking each other in the room. You could be asking your children. The first is this: how can you tell if someone has Jesus as their priority and they are not simply just going to church? Like, what is the difference? How can we tell the difference between a person who just goes to church and a person who makes Jesus their priority? 2, what do people see when they look at me? Man, I wonder, can they see that I've counted the cost to follow Jesus? Or do I look like I just go to church? It's an important question. And the third question is this: am I embracing the cost of being a disciple? Am I looking at my life and saying, Lord, what is the cost of following you? Or am I just comfortable doing what's comfortable? Take time to consider the cost. The bottom line is this: when we count the cost, we realize that all we forfeit is meaningless in comparison to his matchless gift of grace, forgiveness, and love. See how this actually works? Is we present our lives to Jesus and we say to him, Lord, here's all of me. Here's everything I got. I'm broken. I'm messy. My heart is ugly. My mind is toxic at times, but it's all I got, Lord. Here, will you take it? And Jesus, being someone who's full of forgiveness and peace and love, and someone who has sacrificed for us, he looks at his end and it's beautiful. And then he looks back at us and he says, seems like a fair deal to me. Man, can you imagine? We present all of our ugly to the Lord, and his response to us is forgiveness and mercy and love and peace. It's an unfair trade, but because of the blood of Jesus, he says it's righteous, it's right, it's fair. Why? Relationships require sacrifice. And Jesus wants a relationship with you and with me, and it required him to sacrifice himself to make a way for that to happen. So the question today is simply this: are you counting the cost of what it means to follow Jesus? Are you in the large crowd, up close and personal, looking like Jesus, trying to live like Jesus? Or are you just there for the free show? Are you there because it feels good to see people's lives change, to see people baptized, to see people share their stories of how Jesus is changing their life? Because Jesus wants to change your life too. And if you'll count the cost and you'll say yes and make him your priority, he can do it. So today, the question simply is, do you want to be a disciple? And only you can answer that. Have a great week.